We are available on Spotify and YouTube, so don't forget to subscribe for our latest episode.
This podcast is lit.
If you have low test scores, I feel bad for you, son. I got 99 problems, but my class ain't one.
99 problems, but my class ain't one. If your test scores are low, I feel bad for you, son. I got 99 problems, but my class ain't one.
If you're having lockdown problems, I feel bad for you, son. Got 99 problems, but poetry isn't one. Wow, we are 11 weeks into this lockdown with absolutely no sign of it really ending. How are we all doing? How are you doing, Miss Ray?
Well, yeah, I miss people. It sounds ridiculous, but I miss seeing friends and I miss talking to people. I mean, it's lovely seeing you guys once a week, but I would like to see some other people occasionally.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm starting to get a little bit stir crazy. Mr Akroyde, how are you doing?
All right, and don't really like people anyway.
He doesn't go out anyway. It's fine.
not generally a big fan of people, so nothing much to change really.
I saw some people on social media saying that you know you've got a very weird and strange life when there's a lockdown and you don't notice any changes whatsoever.
Yeah, that's pretty much me.
It's basically my life right now.
And there we go. That was DJ Zoom there. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, not bad. Loving it.
Loving it. Okay, so this week we are going to be talking about William Wordsworth's massive poem called The Prelude. We're only fortunately looking at an extract of that. Still quite long, still quite lengthy, still one of the longer poems in the AQA anthology. But we are going to get straight into this week. Our poem in a headline. Mr. Akroyde, what is poem in a headline? Because this is your idea.
Yeah, it's basically summing up the poem in one line, if you can. Although one of my headlines was quite long, but generally speaking,
wasn't it longer than the extract from the Prelude?
Yeah, probably. But again, it's just a way for students maybe to remember each poem. There's 15 poems, and they have to remember each one. And if they can personally sum up each poem in a one sentence kind of headline style, I think it'll just help them remember it. And everyone maybe will come up with a different headline. All three of us will come up with different headlines. That's our personal way in, if you like. Once you've got a headline, I guess as a student, your job is then to find evidence in the poem to back that headline up. That could be one way that you could approach exams.
Brilliant. Okay, well, to prove that chivalry isn't dead, this week, as per usual, the first person is going to be Miss Ray. Your headline, please, followed by your explanation.
My headline this week is Man Left Terrified by Disastrous Boat Ride. I've tried to go for a little bit of a red top. I've tried to go for a bit of the mirror, the sun, and go for a little bit dramatic. And so I've gone for the most emotive part of the poem, and I think that's the fear that our narrator feels at the end of the poem, and the fact that that fear is caused by him going on that journey on that boat ride.
Mr. Akroyde.
Yeah, I suppose my explanation will be exactly the same as Miss Ray, but obviously I've got a slightly different headline. Nature Nutter Gets the Black Mountain Blues.
All right, well, it's made me laugh, so it's a good start. Explanation.
Take Miss Ray's head. I think it just encapsulates the poem. Someone who's obsessed with nature. We know that Wordsworth loved nature, explored it. It was his playground. Goes out and sees a black mountain and nothing's the same again.
Interesting. Okay, well, my poem in a headline is slightly different from yours too, actually. I've taken a slightly different look at it. I mean, to be honest with you, after getting full marks last week, there was part of me thinking I should retire and, you know...
Yeah, I think DJ Zoom's admitted he miscounted, hasn't he?
I'm not too sure what left there is for me to achieve by running this podcast, in all honesty, after achieving full marks, but... You know, I thought I'd be a sport and turn up this week anyway.
You could maybe achieve getting full marks deservedly. That could be a name you could go for, potentially. Not for me to say, but you know.
No, well, maybe we'll ask DJ Zoom in a little bit what his comeback is to that, because there has been a little bit, but you know, behind the scenes there have been some comments been made throughout the past
Mainly
week.
By Mr Akroyde, I have to
Mainly by Mr Akroyde. I mean,
and did you disagree? Did you disagree, Miss Ray?
Oh no, I was fully behind you, but I wasn't the one saying it. I was taking the coward's way out.
Well, actually, let Mr. Firkin say his headline. It better be a good headline after this build-up now, though.
It's true, actually, yeah.
Well, like I said, to be honest with you, there's not really much need for me to even try anymore after getting the form up. So, I've put in a little bit of effort, but chewed up and spat out. Mother Nature has its wicked way with mere mortal child. So I'll explain how I came up with that particular headline. I went for Mother Nature, and I went with the word mother in particular because I feel like nature is the dominant force in this poem. Nature's the one with the experience, the knowledge, the maturity. And I've juxtaposed that with the word child. I feel like nature is in control, but there's a dark side to nature in this poem. It's almost toying with him. There's a line in the poem where it says, led by her. It's almost like William Wordsworth doesn't even believe it's his fault. He's in a trance-like meditative state. And she basically just toys with him, doesn't she? So that's why I've put chewed up and spat out, because that's the level of dominance. Okay for you, Mr. Akroyd, is that all right?
Yeah, a little bit long, wasn't it? But, that was quite good, yeah.
Yes. Well, I'm writing for broadsheets, so it's all right.
Did I get marked down for a long headline a few weeks ago? I think I might have done, actually.
DJ Zoom with the scores.
Okay, so you actually made me laugh, Mr. Akroy. For that, you get 5 points.
I'm just surprised. You actually made me laugh.
You actually made me laugh once. So you get 5 points for yours.
Am I the only one that finds me funny then? Nobody else does?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
hate to tell you, Mr. Akroy, but yes.
Damn.
You're actually laughing with him on this occasion.
Yeah. Miss Ray, 3 points, very short. I don't think it got enough of the whole poem in it. And Mr. Firkins, 4 points. A little bit long, but he definitely got the main points of the poem down. 4 points.
Okay, well, there are some cynics around saying that it isn't my turn to win this week, so it's not a surprise that I finished in second place. Okay, so our next feature.
What is the most important quote and why?
On this occasion, chivalry is dead. Mr. Akroyd, you're first.
Yeah, I've gone for the horizons bound, a huge peak, black and huge. And really that bit that says a huge peak, black and huge. For me, this is the most important quote because it is the Valta. It's the turn of the poem. It's where everything changes. The whole line turns at this moment. One, it's a realization that he's wrong. He thought he was in control of nature. He thought that the actual highest point was the craggy summit, and he's wrong because there's something bigger than that. Number 2, it's almost like the mountain is shown as a kind of giant entity, which represents the full might and power of nature as well. Nature starts to dominate him. It teaches him a lesson, as you said in his headline. It's almost like nature's taken offense at this point, that he can think he's so arrogant to control the water, to control nature, to steal a boat, and nature's fighting back by saying, how dare you steal from me? And it reinforces his sense of powerlessness. One little bit, which I mentioned, the repetition of huge. That's not good writing, really, is it? That's not Wordsworth losing his vocabulary. That's Wordsworth saying the narrator's lost his power. He can't explain it anymore. And that's why I think that's the most important quote.
Interesting. Felt like we were sort of trying to get buy one, get one free territory there.
No, what actually happened was there was a cat that came into my patio, and it actually did disturb me a little bit. I was looking at the cat. It's actually true. I was looking at the cat wandering around. And I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit there. Anyway.
Okay, well, I'm going to piggyback a little bit onto what Mr. Akroy has said, but I hope that won't lose me marks. I hope that, if anything, it will gain me marks for adding additional context. But my quote, to be honest with you, for this particular poem is when Wordsworth says that he lustily, I dipped my oars into the silent lake. Now, as this is a poem, and we're studying it at GCSE level, we'll address the elephant in the room. There is some slight sexual innuendo in this particular line, the idea that he's lustily dipping his oars into the silent lake. Now, I think this is the bit where nature really does want to try and fight back. This is the bit where Wordsworth is almost becoming one with nature. The arrogance is starting to creep in. Lots of people could probably say this poem is fairly similar to Ozymandias in some ways. We've got this person who's a mortal being who's trying to, almost become the same and one with nature, trying to conquer it in some way. And this idea of him, this sort of like sexual image of him with the water, does kind of suggest that they're at one with one another. And I think that's the bit which leads on to what Mr Akroyde was saying, the Valta, the change, where nature decides that it's time to fight back. So for me, that's actually a very important quote. It also makes me laugh a little bit, though, this poem, this idea that he was led by nature. This idea that Wordsworth stole a boat and he's blaming it all on nature. I don't know, guys, we buying that?
No, it's something that I certainly picked up in terms of one summer evening, led by her, like you said, I found a boat. Well, that's within a rocky cove, its usual home. So that suggests he knows where the boat is. But he's blaming it on nature, tricking him. How can nature lead him if he knows where the boat is? I don't think that's a plot hole on Wordsworth's point. That might be him looking back older and ideas of reflection. But I think it's a really interesting point there.
It is indeed.
For us to think about.
Yeah, DJ Zoom, have you heard that? Very interesting. Yeah. Not my words.
I've helped you with your quote.
Not my words, the words of Mr Akroyde, the maverick himself.
Seemed like he needed a bit of help there, so I thought I'd just join in.
Okay, on to the brains of the operation.
I feel like you guys have trampled all over my quote, so I've gone for led by her. Now, I've gone for that for all of the reasons that have already been mentioned. The idea that it really reinforces the fact that it's nature that has the power at the beginning of the poem. And it's the fact that the idea that nature is being personified, particularly as a female, which I think is really interesting. And the idea that he's being almost led astray, he's being forced to break the rules by nature, I think is really important. It's almost suggesting that nature is godlike. It's almost suggesting that nature is the one that is controlling things, like a little puppet master. But it does also have links to Wordsworth and his ideas about religion. Wordsworth was quite famously a pantheist. So his worship of God came through his worship of nature. And that seems to be what's happening there when it says led by her. He's almost suggesting he's got no agency because this godlike nature is the one that's in control.
Nice. DJ Zoom with the scores.
This one's a bit more difficult. I really like all of them. I definitely think the led by her is important, the idea that it links to Wordsworth's thoughts and beliefs. So very well explained in Miss Ray, 4 points. Mr. Firkins, you running off the kind of Mr. Akroyde one there was really nice. I like the one who's like one with nature and he's kind of like blaming nature itself. But I feel as though Mr. Akroyde did have to add a bit more to that and he definitely improved upon it. So you get 4 points to Mr. Akroyde, 5 points for your Valta idea. That's brilliant. Yeah, the nice idea. That's where it changes. That's where it makes a difference. And that's the kind of key point of the poem. The idea that nature switches on him and he becomes afraid. So 5 points for Mr. Akroyde.
Structure.
Okay, so this is an unscored element. So DJ Zoom, you can put your feet up for 5 minutes or so. Mr. Akroyde has already spoken about structure. He was talking about the Valta, something which I don't think we've mentioned before on this podcast, but certainly something which we'd recommend that you discuss in poetry. Quite often there are Valtas. So what's a Valta, quickly?
I think it comes from a dance, actually, initially. I'm not 100% sure of the actual etymology of it, but I think it might have been an Elizabethan dance or a 16th century dance, so correct me if I'm wrong. But what it means is that
we can always delete that bit later if you're wrong.
yeah, we'll check on Wikipedia afterwards and edit it out if it's wrong. But the idea of the term, the change of atmosphere, the change of tone, whether that's a change of speed or a change of atmosphere in a poem. A twist as well, you could argue. I think that's the twist in the poem.
And there are a few of them in this anthology, actually, which we'll probably come back to again at some point. So, I mean, structurally, this poem could be linked to a few that we've already looked at. There's a lot of enjambment in this poem, for example. Again, it's one verse. We've seen that quite a few times, haven't we? Any suggestions why that might be, guys?
I think Mr Akroyde covered this a little bit in the live lesson. You talked about it, the fact that it's so big and imposing is kind of reflective of how Wordsworth is talking about nature, didn't you?
Yeah, I think that just coldly, I guess, it's one long stanza. I suppose it isn't one long stanza, is it, necessarily, because it's part of a bigger poem, and they're all, it's almost like poetic essays. But there's an idea that it's a story within a story, so it all comes in one, like a beginning and a middle and an end, an epic journey. But as it goes along, it becomes almost overwhelming. It almost looks like the mountain that overwhelms him and rears up on him, and he can't get away from it. And I guess that's where the enjambment comes in. There's kind of rowing and rowing, and he can't get away from it, and stream of consciousness comes in. I think the structure definitely supports that interpretation.
100%. Nice work, guys. Okay, so we're on to our final round of this week's podcast. I think we should probably get the scores on the doors before we start, just to make sure that we know who's got how many points and who's got a chance of winning, and who might as well just pack up their stuff and go home now. DJ Zoom, would you like to fill us in?
So in third place is Miss Ray with 7 points. In second place, Mr Firkins with 9. And in first, by 1 point, with 10 points, Mr Akroyde.
Okay,
interesting, the biggest whinger this week is currently in the lead.
Yeah.
Miss Ray, you're just innocent in all this, aren't you?
I am, as usual, the innocent one.
You're the one with the big spoon staring at. I'm the vocal one.
That's true.
I wonder whether it helps going first or last in these things.
I don't think it matters
because I think Mr Jew is just arbitrary pulling points out of the air, to be honest.
Okay.
I would say, to be fair on Mr Jew, I would say that it was only the last week that Miss Ray and I seemed to have an issue with. The other ones, you can kind of see where Mr Jew's coming from. We thought it was just last week.
I had an issue with every episode that I didn't win.
Well, yeah, I suppose. I think Mr Firkin's analysis has been very good, but I just thought the last podcast, it wasn't as good as his previous ones that he's won, but he got full marks. That's why I was just kind of observing, really. It's nothing to do with me being bitter or anything like that.
No. I mean, to be honest, full marks is full marks. That's normally you get a pat on the back for full marks, wouldn't you? Normally?
Yeah. Not in this podcast.
You do. Full marks.
Yeah. But then you think, actually, one quote you stole off Roosevelt. The other, you didn't really. You just made loads of generic statements. Very articulate, of course, Mr. Firkins, but like an articulate way of saying the sky is blue, the water is wet. But sometimes what we say is bull S baffles brains, doesn't it? Sometimes.
Are you suggesting that Mr. Jew was baffled?
I think maybe last week, slightly.
This week, his scoring is perfectly fine.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Well, anyway, just so the listeners know, what we've just heard from Mr. Akroyde is only a microcosm of the unrelenting and unashamedly bitter response he's had to me receiving full marks. What you fools don't know. Okay, I'll kick us off then. What you two fools don't know. And I'm going to blame this at Mr. Akroyd's door, actually, because he's the one who's picked the order for these poems. Really, we should have been studying this poem before we looked at Blake's London or before we looked at Shelley's Ozymandias, because it can be argued that Wordsworth and his best friend Samuel Coleridge started the Romantic movement. A lot of their poems were brought out in the late 18th century before the poems which were definitely inspired by Wordsworth. Blake and Shelley were undoubtedly inspired to be part of the Romantic movement by the likes of Wordsworth and Coleridge, who loved the natural world. And they, like the aforementioned poets, wanted to resist the allure of the Industrial Revolution. Again, a bit like Blake, we can talk about how prophetic this poem and Wordsworth was in general. We can see in 2020 that nature does kick back. We've seen global warming, bizarre weather patterns, the sheer numbers of storms we've had. We've gone from the wettest February on record to the driest May on record. We've been toyed by nature right now. We're locked in our houses for 11 weeks. But their love of nature extended also to their love of natural language. Mr Akroyde did allude to the word huge. I mean, how basic a word is that for a poet of Wordsworth's standards? No longer was poetry aimed at the upper classes, the elite. With the Romantic movement, poetry became understandable for everybody, the average person. It's no longer an art form of the elite. Sitting in universities, it's become something which everybody can enjoy, just like nature itself. Miss Ray.
So I've decided to look at this poem in a slightly different way, in that I've looked at some of the writing that Wordsworth has done when he's been talking about his own poems. So he described this whole set of poems as being like a massive Gothic cathedral, which then almost puts the Prelude as the antechamber to that Gothic cathedral. And it was that I wanted to focus on. The idea that the antechamber being something you have to travel through to get to the cathedral being the place where you do all of your worship, all of your religious behaviours. So by describing the Prelude as the antechamber, is he suggesting that you have to go through what happens in the Prelude in order to get to that worship? Is him describing that as the antechamber, is he implying a transition or a journey? Actually, is this poem more about him becoming a man? Is it more about him growing up and seeing how the world really works? Is it about him becoming a poet? Is it more about that journey and that transition than it is about the power of nature?
Interesting thoughts. And this poem did actually enter the public domain posthumously after he had died. His wife released it. So it is widely considered to be autobiographical. The reason why he didn't release it himself is it's very much based on his own life. So I think that's a good point there, Miss Ray. Mr Akroyde, last but not least.
A little bit. I'm kind of building on what Miss Ray said in a way, little touches of that. But I mean, for me, I don't really like this poem on a literal level, and we're telling students that we've got to have personal responses to. And if I look at this on a literal level, I find it very hard to relate to. What I've tried to do is find a way into it, and this is what some students are going to have to do. And I've had to work at it, and I think I've managed to find a way into it. For me, on a literal level, man nicks boat, goes into lake, nature scares him, he runs away. So what? How can I relate to that? Don't care about this character at all. Got to say, I just don't. He's a bit of a wuss, really. Yeah, big mountain comes on and I'll run away and scared. Now, before anyone in the Wordsworth Association starts chasing me with the pitchforks and stuff, I'm not talking about his skill as a poet. It's technically
I don't
amazing.
think they're tuning in, don't worry about it.
No. Technically, analytically, it's fantastic. But I didn't grow up in the Lake District. You know, I didn't grow up in the countryside. I grew up playing football in alleyways between terraced housing. You know, in the words of Jarvis Cocker, my favourite parks were car parks. And I can't enter this poem looking at it in that way. So I have to find another way in. However, if I flip it and see it as a metaphor, as an allegory, that isn't about nature, but about experience and transition. Wordsworth was a big fan of spots of time. He called them spots of time, moments, massive moments in your childhood or in your young age that change your life forever. So I've tried to find a way in through this. Something's never the same again. I liken it, really. It's very personal because I've got to find a personal way into it because I don't really like the literal reading of it. And I think about my grandma who raised me. And I remember her really fondly. My memories with her, they were bright, they were strange, they were beautiful. I thought the world was great in an innocent, childlike way. Then she died. You could have that as a metaphor of the mountain. That was nature saying that I don't know anything. And all of a sudden, I was lost, alone. I didn't have her in my life. I didn't have that comfort that Wordsworth had. And the world became bleak. You know, the perspective became bleak. Everything shifted. And that experience changed my whole world. Obviously, I recovered from it, but it changed the way I thought about the world. And knowing that death will always be there as well in a strange way, that you can never really be comfortable. And you know, the personal critique, I don't like that character in that poem that does that, but thinking about it as a metaphor for how experience can change and shift you, and that experience can ink into your soul forever, I think that works for me. And even in a strange kind of way, not liking the poem, I think has helped me understand it a little bit more. That's my What Fools Don't Know.
Okay, DJ Zoom with the score.
Whoa, that was a long one. For this, Mr Akroyde, the spots of time like that idea, the fact that he's a wussy, didn't like his poem, sorry, not the character itself inside the poem. Yeah, I kind of like the idea that it's a loss of someone close rather than just a literal kind of nature and stuff like that. For that, I give 7 points. The natural language idea is very nice as well, Mr. Firkins. The idea that, it's an idea that is no longer is it the elite. It can be anybody who can enjoy this, and then everybody can enjoy nature. For you, 8 points. But for me, Miss Ray's idea, the idea that it's the transition, and it's very much like a physical transition through the form of a poem. For you, 9 points.
And how does that mean we've got our scoreboard for the end?
Okay, so Mr. Akroyde on 17 points. In second place, joint second place, in fact, Mr. Firkins with 17 points. Oh, wait, hang on. And finally, Miss Ray with 16 points. I messed that one up. It's joint first this week.
No one won.
There are no winners.
There are no winners.
Quite apt for this poem, really. You know, Wordsworth thought he was a winner, and then he wasn't.
I wasn't going to say anything before the scores, but I did notice that last week I got 10 points for saying you can interpret a poem however you want and do it as one big metaphor. Got 10 for that. This week, Mr. Akroyde did the same thing and only got
Gets
7.
9. Oh, I think it's 9. That was a very interesting noise, Mr. Akroy.
Now, I don't know what's worth more comment, really. One, Mr. Akroyde copied my idea the following week after I said it. Or two,
How did I copy your idea?
That a poem
You
can
went
be
full
whatever you want it to
personal
be.
response. Yeah.
Oh, it can, but didn't we know that as an idea anyway? Haven't we always said that?
We have. I'm only
I've
teasing.
Always told.
It was quite amusing, though, that... Yeah, it's
but
quite amusing that,
I actually came up with a personal response. However, you didn't. You said, yeah, it's a good idea if students have a personal response, but I'm not going to tell you what my personal response is. And you get full marks. I say it's a good idea students having a personal response, and here's my personal response. You get 7 marks. But as I've alluded to, not bitter at all. It's not about the points. It's got nothing
The points
to do
don't
with the
matter,
points.
as we all know.
So can we clear up the final leaderboard? Because I must admit I'm confused.
I think
you and Mr. Firkins have won.
Yeah, Mr. Akroyde and Mr. Firkins joint first, 17 points each.
All right, okay. All right, well, there we go.
Shut
So
Mr.
we can
Akroyde
share
up
it
for a
this
week.
week.
yeah, we can share it. Yeah.
Do you feel better this week?
Yeah, a little bit. I dn't feel bad last week. I was just
Oh,
a little bit.
I don't know.
A bit bemused by the scoring, I would say.
I don't think I've ever seen our WhatsApp group quite so heavily used, Mr. Akroy.
Yeah, well, all's right with the world now, sir. You're back on top.
Yeah, back where I belong.
Okay, so which poem are we doing next?
Remains. And again, I think for a couple of reasons. One, that you mentioned it there. Why didn't I do that before London? I think this one segues quite well into Remains, and also I think we've done a few kind of nature is dominant style poems. I think it is time for a little change, and I think the guilt aspect of stealing the boat and maybe the guilt segues quite well into Remains next week, and then moving into the war poems for a bit.
And is that a poem you actually like this time coming up next week?
I do like Remains. I love Remains. I think with checking out the history, I think they're the two most singular poems, the ones that really stand out for me.
Brilliant. Okay, well, signing off from Mr. Firkins, the Maverick, Mr. Akroyde, the Brains, Miss Ray, and DJ Zoom. Till next time, goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.